Good afternoon and welcome to the Monday, December 8th, 2008 informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. The meeting is now in order. The first order of business is City Council staff report. We will have updates from Deborah A. Owen, City Clerk.
Thank you and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. Just a couple of reminders, some of which you have been given over the weekend. The Breakfast Club meeting will actually occur in December, on December 17th, although there won't be the hosting of the legislature, those of who are local delegates to peer. Instead, it will just be no presentations, but a dialogue amongst the school board or the school districts, county, and then the city elected officials. In addition, just to let you know, Inside Town Hall is going through a transition as they have our Reed Holson, who has always been the interviewer, has taken a full-time position with the city. So there will be no Inside Town Hall on December 19th unless they secure an independent kind of a contract with a new interviewer. Just to let you know, I know that some of you had requested to be on that December 19th meeting. I will let you know as soon as I know when that will be available again for you to be on and discuss issues that are important to you. And then finally, just so you know, tomorrow is another district commission meeting. Please know you're always welcome to attend. We release those and do press releases on those so the public can attend if they so wish. They are proceeding nicely through the discussion of where to adjust the boundaries of the city for the districts, the council member districts. As you know, the central district is small, and the southwest district is very large, according to our provisions in city charter, and so they're just making some adjustments there. And then also, if you will, the Charter Revision Commission will occur on Tuesday at 3:30. They are continuing the discussion on the idea of joining the elections, and then also to look at some provisions of the charter and wanting to make sure that we comply with the strong mayor form of government and not the one that was enacted prior to 1994. And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you, Deborah. Questions of Deborah? Councilor Knutson.
You know, not a question for Deborah, but I just want to apologize. I know that I contributed a great deal to the confusion over Breakfast Club on December 17th, and I'd like to apologize to all the councilors and the staff for that because, again, you know, sometimes in December in the last few years we've met with legislators and sometimes we haven't. And so, you know, in typical fashion at the November meeting, I just kind of toward the end of the meeting said, hey, you know, aren't we going to meet with legislators? And so everyone kind of, I think, probably to be courteous or whatever, they said, oh, that'd be okay. But then as I thought about it more and as I know their legislators, their schedules are just ridiculous, just terribly crazy. I thought, well, we by now haven't given them much notice, and the school board works really closely with their legislative leaders, and the county already had an event planned. So I just want to take full blame for any confusion there. And again, regularly, as you all know, Breakfast Club, when there isn't a program, I mean, the room is always available. So this is not new, but I am responsible for the confusion. I apologize.
Thank you for that, Dee. Any other questions? Very good. We'll move on to the Audit Committee. Pat?
We're going to have a presentation regarding the golf course management agreement audit, and we'll do that later on in the day. That's all right with you?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Any questions of Mr. Costello? Seeing none, next up would be the Fiscal Committee. Mr. Councilor Benniga?
No report, Bob.
No report. Very good. Number 6 is Land Use Committee. And let's see, that would be Councilor Jamison.
Thank you. Yes, we had a meeting last week with Public Works. We talked about, actually we had Councilor Kermit Staggers and Bob Litz there, and we talked about Old Orchard Heights. We're going to be looking at repaving the roads up there, and they're going to be sending out some communications to those residents and talking about that project. So we were just updated on that process and the whole program, and I think that letter is going to be going out shortly, before the end of the year. And we had a good discussion about roads and sidewalks, and if either councilors have any other comments, I guess that's really about it for now.
You know, I'd just like to add that there are some peculiarities in that situation. I guess when the city annexed it in 1984 or 86, they agreed not to have sidewalks, and the roads would stay narrow, and it'd have that country feel to it. And as a result of that, they never were assessed for roads. And now when the new road goes in, and I believe it's $35 a foot for one half of the road on your frontage, they will have to pay for that road because it is the type of situation it is with no curb, gutter, and sidewalks. If it had curb, gutter, and sidewalks, they'd have paid the assessment once, and the road would have been part of the regular maintenance. And I think the idea was that there perhaps had been some turnover since the original agreement had been struck up there, and some people may be calling counselors wondering why they have to pay for a road, and it was not included in their assessments, which they don't have. So, any questions of Greg? Very good. Thank you for that, Greg. Public Services Committee, Kenny's gone, so I'd like to call on Vernon Brown.
We'll be meeting right after this informational session, and the only issue we have to talk about is the Code of Ethics ordinance, and Deborah Owen's been working with us on that, and we should be able to get through that today and bring back some recommendations.
Very good. Questions of Vernon. Councilor Knudsen.
And not a question for Councilor Brown, but just wanted to add that I'm also going to mention under other discussion or whatever at Public Services Committee meeting today is I'm just going to ask the committee just to go kind of to the next step on that, cleaning up some campaign finance issues from way before our last revision. And I'm going to ask the Public Services Committee if they would consider authorizing the city attorney to just settle the case, a couple cases with some PACs for like $100 for the some unintentional, inadvertent campaign violations before our new policy. So I just want you to know I'll be bringing that up too, so that you all know that.
Very good. Yes, I saw your email on that, Councilor Knudsen, and I thought, I want to thank you for your work on that. I agree with it. I think there's a lot of confusion here this first time around trying to get the new ordinances as opposed to the state laws, which are supposed to mimic each other. But I think after this year, people will be aware of what's going on.
And the only reason I kind of waited this long, it kind of looks like kind of old news by now, is that I just wanted to wait until we got our, new policy in place and so forth, and just thought I'd try to get this taken care of before the end of the year, possibly.
Thank you for that. Questions of Councilor Knudsen? Seeing none, now item number 8, City Council open discussions. Anybody have anything? Councilor Knudsen.
I just wanted to say that last week we had another very productive, very successful Housing First meeting, and Councilor Anderson was able to attend that meeting. And again, we are just, I reminded the county that we really do like to work with them, and we like to work well with them, and we're making good progress. And I'm hoping that our committee will be able to tell you by the early January, I'm hoping that we'll be able to tell you that we have found a good location, a great location for a Housing First project. And again, the parameters that we're working with is we're trying to find a location that is accessible to community resources, that is a continuation of the city-county cooperative effort, one where, that there's some law enforcement is immediately accessible. And, of course, we want to just continue we'd like to try to vary the locations around our community for these kinds of important services. And then I think really importantly, it would be good for me to say that, again, we've recently heard the report on the Safe Home pilot project, and so we want to continue the success of that program, and again be hopefully somewhere kind of close to the county human Services Office and the Community Health Department. So we're working hard. I'm really encouraged. I really enjoy working with everyone on that committee, and always appreciate the extra time that Councilor Brown puts forth on this whole homeless issue on behalf of everyone in our community.
Councilor Brown, and then we're going to take questions from both.
I just wanted to raise the letter we got from the cab company. I'm always a little concerned, and granted, I understand we're only hearing one side of the story, but I'm always a little concerned when I see that city employees are saying that it's not a public record. I see Gail Eastland's here representing the city attorney's office. I don't know if you're aware of this letter or not. In short, the letter says that this is from a cab company, and he has tried to check to see if the competing cab companies in town have commercial insurance to cover their business. His claim is that they do not, and he's been told that that is not a public record. My interpretation of it would be that that's the very purpose we collect that information, so public can see that they are covered. Do you know anything about this?
Well, I did see that letter from that individual, and Lori Hogstad's response to Justice Amundson to, I believe Lori checked on the 11 cab companies that exist within the city and found that there might be one that does not have commercial insurance. So I think this individual thinks there's a larger problem, and I don't think that's the case. As far as the public record issue, now I know the definition under state law is what constitutes a public record is if there is a statute that requires the keeping of the record. Now, there's no state statute that I'm aware of that requires that to be kept. Now, whether we should analogize to an ordinance that requires it to be kept, I guess, is an issue I can certainly speak with Lori about, and Justice Amundson, too.
What is being done with a company that does not have the commercial insurance?
Well, we just found out about that this afternoon, so I imagine we'll be in contact with them. But I think actually we need an amendment of the ordinance because the ordinance doesn't specify commercial insurance.
Okay.
It just specifies, or it generalizes to insurance, and we might need an amendment to the ordinance to require that they actually carry commercial insurance.
Okay. When it comes to public safety issues like this, I would prefer that all those documents be available to the public so they know that they can find out whether they are covered while riding in a cab or any other similar public safety issue.
Yeah, and I'm not aware that who Lori spoke with about the public record issue. I'll certainly look into that, and I understand your concerns about that.
Thank you.
Questions? Councilor Costello.
Gail? So is the city attorney's office going to bring forth that amendment then?
I believe so, yeah. This just all transpired this afternoon, but it looks like a pretty simple thing to do.
Okay.
So
we can rely on somebody getting it done, though?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Questions of Councilor Brown? Very good. Seeing none. Is there anything else for the general good here today? Councilor Costello.
In the directors' meeting the other morning, there was some discussion about item 3 on tonight's agenda regarding the order of business for council meetings. And it sparked a lot of discussion and concern by the administration. And I guess would be a request from the administration side that we defer that so it can go back to fiscal committee to kind of get reevaluated. If that's the wishes of the council, I'll make that deferral tonight. And then I wonder, the chair of the committee, Gerald, when do you think we could put that on the agenda next? Could we, I would say maybe just try to defer it until next Monday. Can the fiscal committee get together prior to that? Or even next Monday? The joint meeting's been canceled.
Okay. I think that would be fine. I think if we can contact the mayor's administration staff who wants to be included in that conversation, if we can organize that for either before or after, that would be fine with me.
If the conversation was really geared towards the part where we are making the transfers in the budget part of the consent agenda, and there was some concern that somehow the council was exercising some sort of authority over those transfers when we obviously do not. And I tried to ensure the administration that we are in no way trying to exert control over those transfers other than make them more public. And I thought we had a solution, or I thought Deborah had brought a very good solution to the idea where we would just call it a report from the administration, and having it on the consent agenda, we would be voting on accepting the report, not necessarily making any authorization or of the transfer itself, just merely accepting the report presented by the administration. So I personally don't understand why it's an issue, but I did offer under the in the meeting that we could go back and rediscuss it at the fiscal committee. So I will make that amendment this afternoon or this evening.
Councilor Benega?
Well, I think the original intent obviously was what you just suggested, and it was an acknowledgement of the fact that we did receive the reports, but since we've been dealing and working on this for months, I don't think waiting one extra week, getting some more input from administration is going to be that big of an issue. So I think it would be important that we do have an opportunity to listen to their concerns.
The only thing is that if there's something that comes out of that, if we wait till next Monday to meet, if something comes out of that, we're going to have a very short time to react to it. But I guess we could always defer it for another week at that time.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that topic? Is there anything else here that councilors care to bring up forth? Very good. Then I see tonight that we have two presentations to be made in front of us. The first one is going to be the Airport Overlay Ordinance. We have with us Jeff Schmidt, who's the Assistant Director of Planning and Building Services. Jeff?
Thank you, council members. Jeffrey Schmidt, representing Planning and Building Services. We have a very esteemed group of citizens with us this evening. The study group that worked with this issue over the last approximately 5 to 6 months, we put together a study group based on some of the suggestions that this council had to review the overlay district for the City of Sioux Falls' airport. This was adopted into law back in basically January of 2008. We've been using it for the last year. During its implementation, there were some issues that we wanted to address, and we're bringing those forward to you today. One of the big things that we need to bring forward and make sure that everybody understands, and this is really more for the citizens out there as well as anybody that's in the audience, is the intent of the overlay district. The intent of the overlay district is not only to protect the Sioux Falls Regional Airport as it exists now, but to continue to protect the property owners that are out there in that area and future property owners as they continue to develop into that area. That was the intent of the existing ordinance, and that's the intent of this ordinance too. It's really threefold: the airport, property owners, and future property owners. And again, summary of that is if people buy property, if they buy a house and they did not understand that they were next to an existing airport, what did we do as council, as staff, to say that there was an airport in this area? There was a real understanding. That was our intent. The Airport Overlay District. We had a study group of approximately 11 members. We had 5 different meetings that ran between July and September. There's 4 things that we'll raise to you today in the suggestion to change this ordinance. Number 1 being that the boundaries were decreased. We're proposing that we decrease the boundaries in this new ordinance as we bring it forward to you. Number 2 is that now the standards are with rezonings. The standards are that on a rezoning parcel of ground, that's when we're really going to be looking at what a property owner would have to be addressing. In the past, with the previous ordinance, it was with a building permit. So when they came in to get a building permit, that's when they had to address the standards. Now, what we're really trying to address is there's a request to you, there's a request of you that says, we currently have our land zoned this, and we would rather have it this way. Well, you should look at it from the standpoint of, is that the most appropriate for this ground, and what standards would we want to put upon that ground? The second bullet underneath there is non-residential ground is to be encouraged. On the second side of that is residential is being discouraged. So again, you have ground out there. The best case example is they bring land in, it's agricultural, it's crop ground, and they say, we would like to have residential land zoned next to the airport. Not the best thing to have residential ground next to the airport. There's a lot of impacts not only for the airport, the property owners, but the future people that are living there. Well, what's their options? Well, we prefer them to have office, industrial, commercial, anything other than residential. So rezone the ground to something other than residential. They could still do residential ground, but it's not the preferred, and that's how we should look at the rezoning requests. And the bullets I have there, they should meet the standards. If they meet the standards, they proceed forward. If they do not meet the standards, there's still a check and balance. This is an overlay district, just like our other 7 different overlay districts that we have in the City of Sioux Falls. They come to the Planning Commission with a public hearing, and the Planning Commission could waive that standard and not require them to meet it. There's specifically a break there. Those are the real changes that we're proposing to go forward with. But there's also this discussion about easements. There is an easement. There is easements in this ordinance. There was easements in the previous ordinance too. However, please understand that the easement language is not part of the ordinance. It's an administrative standard. What we're saying is that in the ordinance it says you shall place an easement, you can place an easement, but we don't have the language specifically stated in the ordinance. It's not addressed that it has to say this. Last time we got into those specifics, and it created a lot of hardship for different parties. Right now we're saying, and the committee basically came forward over these 5 meetings and said, that would come later. It's an agreement between 2 parties. It doesn't go into the ordinance. It's just the language that gets developed. Also, that last little bullet up there, that last little statement is there were some questions raised by not only the public but a member of the study group in regards to what about the existing easements. We can release the interest on those existing easements, again, between 2 parties if the 2 parties agree, and the City of Sioux Falls is willing to release those interests, so we're going to be working on those. Now, really the specifics. This is the existing overlay district that we have in place right now. You can see the airport there as we look to the north and how large the existing overlay district is. This is what the proposed boundary is. The proposed boundary is significantly smaller. It's Interstate 29 on the west, Interstate 90 on the north, Cliff Avenue on the east, and Madison on the south. The colors on the map represent existing residentially zoned property. And again, that's the greatest impact. That's what we're talking about. If someone owns land in that area with inside that red box and they say, we'd like to zone ground, if they're already zoned, they're already grandfathered, they're allowed. But if they'd like to zone additional land within there, we would ask them to put an easement on their property because it's not appropriate to have existing residentially zoned property next to the airport. If there can't be an agreement reached, if the 2 parties can't decide on what that easement is, or again, if the property owner does not want to have an easement on their property, they come before the Planning Commission, they state their case, and Planning Commission can decide that they agree there's no need to have an easement. But at least at that point, there's a public forum, there's a public discussion, and they say, we want residential next to the airport, and we're not going to put an easement on our property. And I feel comfortable at that point that any future property owners that have houses out there wouldn't come back to me or City Council and say, wait a minute, I know the developer's not here, but I bought a house in this area and there's jets flying over. Why didn't anybody? Well, there's an issue there. Well, why didn't anybody what? Notify, give me regulations? Well, we were trying, and we can go back to the public record. The last two slides are really in regards to these easements. The rezoning on the property is what I just referred to. There's also easements on building permits within the 65 decibel or the noise limits for the noise exposure zones. On the end of each of the runways, there's federally mandated issues in regards to the 65 decibel noise levels. Okay? If you're going to be doing a building construction for a residential property in that noise level at the end of each of the runways, we would ask on a building permit that they get a easement on the property. Everything else is tied to rezoning. But in those 65 decibel areas at the end of the runways, we'd ask on a building permit. Existing homes are still fine. Fences, we're not talking about fences. We're not talking about driveways. We're not talking about porches. Inhabitable structures, substantial improvements, and we have those impacts those homeowners. We have 21 houses on the east side of Sioux Falls and 1 on the west side. Here's what it looks like. This is at the end of the runway. This shows how the airport noise exposure zone goes on the south end of the airport. That's Black Hawk and Russell, and basically Maine and Russell, and those little red dots are single-family structures. That purple area is C2, so the majority of these single-family houses are zoned or built in a commercial zoning district. And if they wanted to rebuild their home in that area, we'd ask them to put an easement on their property because they're at the end of the runway and will have noise exposures. The last exhibit is on the west side. This is the green area is the Elmwood Golf Course. We don't have residential structures in the Elmwood Golf Course. We have one property on the west side close to the Big Sioux River. And again, if that one house was asking to rebuild at the end of the airport, we'd ask an easement. And that ends my presentation. And there's committee members here, too, if you'd like to ask any of them.
Councilor Knudsen.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Would you please share with us just a list of the 11 members who were on the study committee and maybe tell us a little bit about, what group they represented, if they represented a group?
Sure,
and,
I'll do
or
the group.
introduce them in the audience or something?
I'll do the group first and then see if I can remember all the names.
Okay.
Okay. We had the Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Realtors, the Home Builders, we had the airport, we had the airport board, and we had citizens groups. Okay? So we have Judge Amundsen's here, Hal Wicks here from the airport board. We have Mike Marnock from the airport authority. We have Barton Hacker from the Board of Realtors. R.J. Cliff is from the military. That's a group I forgot. Okay. John Schmitz from a citizens group, and you walked up. Bob O'Connell from the Chamber of Commerce. So
Thank you.
very diverse group.
Thank you. And then
Esteemed colleagues.
Thank you, and I appreciate all of their time they spent on this, too. And then my other question for right now is, in how do these recommendations line up with, neighboring communities? I'm talking about, like Minneapolis, Omaha, I'm not talking about small towns that don't have airports. But, I'm just wondering, since obviously there are many communities that have airports, I was just wondering how this lines up with other
Comparable.
communities.
Sure. Comparable communities, just about every one I've looked at has an overlay district or some type of easement language placed in there. It all gets down into then the specifics on how do they do that. Fargo, Lincoln, Omaha, Sioux City, the larger Minneapolis, St. Paul, Denver, Chicago, they all have those types of issues in place because it's going back to that intent. It's twofold. One, you have citizens that are living next to these, and there's impacts. Number two, you have an existing airport in all these communities that it's trying to operate, and when you have encroachment by property owners next to the airport, there's a conflict between those two. So the majority of, I don't know of really any of them maybe that don't have something in place, except us.
Councilor Knudsen.
And then not a question for Jeff, but I just, with Mr. Marnock, our director of our airport in the audience, I just would really like to commend him for his many years of service serving our community as the head of the airport, and wish him very much the best in retirement. So.
Any other questions? Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Jeff, that one house there that's in the flight line for landing there, we're going to force them to get an easement?
If they reconstruct their house. As an existing house, they're fine.
So,
If they,
you mentioned it wouldn't include a fence.
correct?
It would not include that.
It would not.
A new porch, it would?
No.
Okay. Electrical, they would, right?
No.
No? So how do we know when they have to do it and don't?
If my best example is if
Okay.
it's a $100,000 house,
Uh-huh.
and they're doing improvements to the house and they're adding $60,000 to their house, it's a substantial improvement to a habitable structure because it's more than the structure itself. They're not going to, they're adding that much onto the structure. That's how we know. They come in for a building permit, they're adding more than the value or. And we'd say, again, at that point, it's not appropriate to continue to be building within this noise impact zone. We'd like to have an easement placed on your property, and it has to be an agreement between the two parties, between the airport authority and the City of Sioux Falls on the easement. And just to clarify that easement aspect that wasn't up on the slides, we do not have this scheduled for City Council at this point. It's not scheduled for a first reading or second reading. The suggestion that I'm bringing forward to you today is that the committee continue to look at the language for the easements and bring you forward that administrative language for you to look at until such time as we can come up with a consensus and have you look at the language. But that's still just draft or sample language until such time as two parties can agree.
Councilor Costello.
Jeff, this overlay district only affects residentially zoned property within the overlay district? Is that?
The easements only affect property that's being requested to be rezoned residential. If they have agricultural ground and they want to rezone it to commercial, no easements necessary. If they want to rezone it to industrial ground, no easements necessary. Office, recreational. But if they want to rezone the ground to residential, we'd ask for an easement.
Okay. And then the two maps of the overlay district and the boundary is smaller. Did it change? Is that your proposed change, or is this the original boundary from the ordinance of last year?
This is the original one that we have up on the screen right now, and it was based upon the Federal Aviation Administration regulations for conical zone on the impacts. This is the proposed one that's in the ordinance as I have it today, which really addresses the three Federal Administration regulation rulings, the noise exposure zone, and as we talked through the committee, it's a good definable boundary. North, south, east, and west with streets. People can say, I'm west of interstate. Am I west of interstate? Am I in or am I out? I'm north. There's still going to be, in Jeff Schmidt's opinion, there's still people outside of this that will be impacted by the airport, but we're not addressing their issues or concerns at this time.
Thanks.
Councilor Jameson.
Jeff and committee members, I like where you're headed with this. It looks really good. I like the definable lines and where you're headed. And this is really just an update, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And I wanted the committee members here because I thought you may have questions for them, too.
I would like to hear from the member supporting the, or in charge of the citizens. Do you have any comments? Sure. I guess I'm really curious.
Where did that last just a little background on that house. That house in particular.
John, would you please identify yourself so for the public record?
John Schmidt, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That one house in particular happens to be rather unique as far as background with me. That house was built by Habitat on land that was acquired with city money from the city through a grant program. And it doesn't have a garage on it. So my guess is you might see it if somebody came back trying to do a garage, maybe with a bedroom to get it over that, what did you say, 60%? You may see that one come back. So that one may be an issue. With regards to, I kind of see three issues. The first one is the easement language that I think everybody agrees we need to get up front and everything, because the last time we didn't have the language up front, at least as a template, we ran into problems, which is why I would like to see it resolved prior to the passage of the ordinance. The second issue has to do with the easements that are out there, and I think as long as everybody agrees that if somebody comes in, asks to have the easement vacated, that we'll be allowed to get it vacated if it's outside the area that we're talking about.
Do you know how many easements are out there, John?
I do not.
Does anybody know how many easements are out there? We issued easements, but we don't have a record of them? Is that?
We didn't necessarily issue the easements. The easements were between two parties. They were between the applicant and the airport authority. So as I've had this conversation with John in the past, I can track them down. I can check with Minnehaha County. I can check with the airport. But I mean, to go back to individual applicants, I don't have a list of them, no, the City of Sioux Falls.
Well, I find it I'm a little astonished that we wouldn't have, now, there wasn't the notification for the easement at the point of pulling the building permit? Isn't that when they found out?
Correct.
Well, then wouldn't building services have something, Jeff? I mean,
No. Because the easement wasn't with us. It wasn't our easement.
Correction, the city was listed on the easement as a grantor. The city was listed as a grantor as well as the airport authority on the easements for the language that was provided.
Well, who owns the airport?
The city.
The City of Sioux Falls? Is that correct, Mike? Does the City of Sioux Falls own the airport?
Would you please, yeah, we should have him come.
Could you
to the-
please come up, Mike, please?
Yeah. Mike Marnock, Airport Director. Just a second. We started this, actually, let me give you a little background. We got into this, or you got into this because we took a master plan and we tried to make it better. Okay? It was all zoned agriculture. And we were trying to update the agriculture to something more positive in keeping with today's regulations. So that's how we, by fits and starts, developed an easement that probably was done by legal counsel without a lot of input from people that will ultimately have to agree to an easement. So we did some of those, and as you know, that didn't go over very good with the public because it was somewhat thought as an unjust taking. So there are a few easements, and Bob, there's a lot of easements out there. If you go back 20, 30, 40 years, we've always tried to acquire easements one way or another by basically agreement from the landowner. So all those easements that people have an objection to, when we discover how many or who they are, we'll be happy to waive those or vacate them so that those folks aren't have an easement on their property that they haven't really agreed to. So it's not about an unjust taking. It was about taking agriculture zoning and trying to update it to the state of the art. And as we were directed to do in our last master plan, we didn't, the devil's in the details, as you can see. It doesn't really go just as smooth as you would like it to. But we're at some point now where we think we have something that most everybody will agree to. And as we go forward, maybe there's people that want to come forward and talk about it. And so we're here today as one day to try to explain it, to do it in a better fashion. But the exact number of easements, we can do some research, Bob, and figure that out for you, because we have easements from 20, 30 years ago that were given freely by people that wanted to do development, and we asked them for an easement, and they were very happy to grant it.
Mike, yeah, and I don't think those are the ones that were the problem. It's the ones that were caused by the recent developments.
Correct, and we can certainly figure out what that number is. I would say off the top of my head, it's 20 to 30 easements at most. And as Kermit said, some of those easements were people about a fence or a porch or something like that. It was never meant to involve that, but the language was just, it was an easement that was somewhat gray, and they tried to turn it black and white. So when you get bureaucrats in the mix, that's where you get judgments made. So we'll have to, we can figure out exactly how many easements are there. And we'd be, as a representative of the airport authority, I believe the airport authority would be happy to vacate that language, because that language was never probably publicly spoken and addressed and all that. But it was what the best we could do at the time. We just tried to take an agriculture zoning into something better.
Okay, Mike, could you explain to me how the ownership of the airport works, or is it owned by the taxpayers?
I think it's owned by the users, because somewhat years in 1986, airport authorities was in the state of South Dakota. Airport authorities were created in the 70s for, actually Aberdeen asked to have the airport authority. It was created at the state level. Airport authorities were allowed to exist. In 1986, the council, at that time it was a three-member, mayor, 3 members, and you did everything, or the previous people that aren't here anymore did what was done at the time to create the airport authority. So the airport authority was created in 1986. And then the assets of that were in the airport department, which was a division or a department of the city of Sioux Falls, were handed over to the airport authority for management. And today, the mayor appoints the 5 board members for 5-year terms, and the council approves their term, or they approve the mayor's appointment.
Very good.
So
Councilor,
nobody really had a problem with it because we were never asked for any tax dollars.
Councilor Staggers, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering here, what we have on the overlay right now is, where the aircraft are coming in.
That's correct.
Why can't we have this overlay being that? That would reduce the number of properties that would be part of the overlay.
I guess that question will have to be, basically, that's city property. I guess that question more appropriately directed to Jeff, maybe.
Before you go, Mike, I apologize for your obvious discomfort in calling you up here, and I too.
No, it's Bob, it's just a function of multiple sclerosis, which is, when I rush to get somewhere, my foot doesn't, I have to drag it along a little bit, okay? But after I sit down a little bit, it's you don't have to apologize. It is what it is.
All right. Well, thank you for your years of service as well, Mike.
Hi, Council. I'm R. James Clift. I represented the military and the civilian aviation on this study group. I flew for 26 years in the Air National Guard with all 3 of the Jamesons that have flown out there, and 21 years with the airline overlapping service. And, sir, I just wanted to clear up, there's been a lot of discussion about easements here. In fact, that was the bulk of the presentation, and it really is a very small part of the ordinance, and I think I can clear that up for you all as it pertains to our citizens. The red lines represent the overlay district itself. The only time that an easement would be required within the red square is in a zoning regulation change. Regulations for approval, if it's residential, then a navigation easement for noise and vibrations will be required. So only within the red square, changing the zoning from whatever it is now, agriculture is the primary, to residential. For existing properties, within the noise exposure zone only, what you see up there in the blue is the noise exposure zone. That's the 65 decibel zone. That's aircraft approaching and departing on the various runways. 321 is the north-south, northeast, southwest runway, and 1533 is the other one. Only within that zone. So note on the south west corner, which is the one that John pointed out, the single home that is within that, and on the southeast corner, there are a couple of homes. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to bring up the larger scale map to see that. But only if those homes in those 2 corners, or anyone were to attempt to rezone within that blue contour, or result in a building permit within that blue contour, would an easement be required. So, for example, the homes on the east side of the blue contours, the yellow depicted in yellow here, but within the red airport overlay district, no easement required. Even if they get a building permit, no easement required. Only if they're in the noise contour area. Is that more clear?
Yes, I understand that, but you had a bigger overlay district, and now it's been shrunk down to these boundaries.
Yes.
I'm saying let's just shrink it even more down to the area where the aircraft are actually coming in for landing and takeoff.
Well,
let's just eliminate, some of this additional regulation on these people that are going to be within this overlay district right now. Just simply, reduce it even more.
I do understand your logic, sir. I would say this, as a citizen of this great city of Sioux Falls, we need to compromise. The compromise would be, would we want to encroach upon our airport and the traffic in and out of our airport, which results in development, which results in moving the city forward, at the expense of further development, I guess, if you will. This is the overlay district, the red square, or the red object up there, sir, is strictly a zoning area, strictly to result in protection in the zoning process.
Councilor Bett?
If I could just reply. My
Yes, go ahead.
understanding is that we just would prefer not to have residential houses within the red area.
Yes.
And, myself, I would prefer not to have my house there either. But there are some people that might want to have their housing there because of being near the airport, it's going to be cheaper housing.
Certainly, and they can.
So, yeah.
And
But
they
the thing is,
can
we
do
have
that.
to go through this process, which might approve it or might not approve residential housing.
Well,
Let's just let them go ahead. If they want to build some residential housing in that area, fine. They're going to pay the consequences because many people don't want to be near an airport. But those people that don't mind and prefer the reduced cost will go ahead and do it.
Certainly, for their protection, sir, we felt as a group that an easement would be beneficial, actually, so that they're aware that they're within the airport district, and so that future, if they sold the property, so that future property owners within that district would also be aware. It's for protection for both sides.
I guess I would say that just simply some very minor due diligence would indicate you're near an airport.
Councilor Benega.
This gentleman can help me out, sir.
Maybe a little bit. I'm Hal Wick, Chairman of the Airport Board. Part of the reason, Councilor Staggers, is that small area is not the only area. That's a primary area. If you look at where the airplanes are actually flying and where the noises actually are, it's a little bit larger than that. The space that was in the original one more than covered the space. This covers it, but let's say it's much easier to define, and that's why we kind of agreed to this. But if you can follow me for a second. The runways here, if the person's taking off and stays in a pattern, it's going to be covering an area at least that large. If you could see where my pen went, I can't probably do both unless we. All right. It's just that even when the airliners are coming in, and I'm like R.J. Cliff. He's got me beat at the guard with a year and a half of flying time, but I got him beat by 11 and a half years at the airline. And when we came in and when we leave, we do things to try and reduce the noise by getting to 3,000 feet as quickly as possible and in a straight-out direction. But when we do leave, we're turning out. When we're coming in, we aren't going to 3,000 feet. We're turning in and we come across and we make our descent, but our engines that are at lower speed. But if you're in the F-16 or military airplanes, I almost feel like we should have something maybe a little more on 27 and 9 because we have the 130s that come down, and I don't know if they still do, but they used to love to come down and do their assault landings on that runway because it was perfect size. But if you look at the area of the red, where the red lines are, it covers, I would say, all of it. 99% or better. But you need that space. It's for protection for the airport in the future, too.
Councilor Benega, you still have a question?
My question was going to be, and I'm not sure who would answer this, but if in fact, the city continue to grow, the airport we can assume is going to grow at the same time. Are we going to need to adjust this overlay district again in the future to have expansion capabilities so we're not hitting the residential areas?
Well, actually, this is, part of this is something that RJ Cliff did some checking on, and that's the follow-on airplane we hope the Guard gets has a little bit higher decibel perhaps, but all of the airliners are getting quieter. And it's just as they design engines and make them quieter, but when you're working in a military situation, you don't look at as much at quiet as you do power and how much you can do with it. So there might be a time when it could get a little bit bigger, but I doubt it. We're trying to make this work.
Excuse me. Even with expansion of terminals or the number of airlines won't affect the space, so to speak, needed for landings and takeoff?
I personally wouldn't foresee that in the near term. I think we'll see larger airplanes rather than more airplanes.
Okay.
My fear is that we get fewer airplanes, to be honest with you, with fuel costs.
And I guess one of the important things to continue to bring up here is last time we really looked at it from what Hal and RJ are talking about is what are the 2025 impacts to the area, and we started out with that big service area. Today we do have representation from the Board of Realtors and the home builders that looked at this from a residential impact, and there was support consensus from those two boards to say, yeah, this makes sense because it protects those future homeowners from buying a house and then having to go back to a developer or someone saying, well, why didn't someone tell me that there was, airplanes and impacts to that? So the home builders and the Board of Realtors were supportive of this, as well as the airport.
Jeff, I did have one question here. I'm looking down south there, and it looks like the T airport is here to stay for a while at least. And, I think the city limits are 1.5 miles, 1.75 miles away from that. As this group looked at anything concerning the T airport, in this regard?
Yes, and it wasn't necessarily an impact to us. RJ did a lot of that work just this last week. It's not a significant airpack that has the same flight patterns that we do up here at the Sioux Falls Regional Airport, as well as it's not in our jurisdiction.
Would it be in our joint jurisdiction? That was the thought that occurred to me. It's the joint jurisdiction is within 3 miles of the annexed property in the city of Sioux Falls. Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that would be in our joint jurisdiction, at least.
And from that standpoint, then I'll take a big step backwards and say, well, we can look at the T airport. We can put the 65 decibels over the top of it. We can put the federal regulations in regards to the conical, the trans, everything that we did here, and we'll get back to Mr. Stager's issue that the boundary for that airport will be minute. There will be no boundary around the T airport because they don't have the same military or the aircraft at that airport as we do, and the boundary would be so small it would only be T.
Okay, I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, we looked at it, and that's how we tried to address it.
Very good. And I understand today that this was an informational type situation. We're not making a decision here today. They're presenting information and getting some feedback here. Mike?
The one thing I'd like to say, Kermit, you raise a good point, but it's the best. The attempt was to take a non-aviation person and allow them to have a map they could see in terms of roads that they understood. I mean, only us aviation folks that like airplanes and frankly like noise, that like to have their house off the end, which I used to have down in Kingswood 4, but it was an attempt, Kermit, to try to make it easier to understand with roads that people could see rather than the vague noise. You kind of got to understand aviation to understand the noise map.
Mr. Schmidt?
I guess we were just discussing off the end of the T runway. The south edge of Sioux Falls is residential. Just north of the T airport is industrial. And somewhere in there, there's a chance of some residential going in. And with regards to health and welfare, from an engineer's perspective, which I am, it may be advisable to have the city do a little bit of control to try and avoid residential off the ends of the runway. Off to the sides with the noise issue and all that, I don't see it as being a big issue. But off the end of the runway, there may be a concern that.
Well, that I guess was my concern, because that's where planes, if they're going to typically have trouble,
Yep.
that's where it happens, so. Jeff, anything else? Is there any questions for anybody else or comments from anybody else?
I was just wondering if there was anyone else in the audience that wanted to speak to us today on this topic?
Barton Hacker, Chief Executive Officer of the Realtor Association of the Sioux Empire. I just wanted to reiterate, being at the table and looking very specifically at the requirements for residential real estate and the impact of it. The initial ordinance that we looked at was, in our opinion, very broad, too broad, and the land area that it involved was much too significant. By drawing the overlay impact district the way we did, what we wanted to do was both try to minimize the number of residential housing units that was affected by this, but also keep in mind the importance of the airport to the community and the growth of the airport. And knowing both of those things, we knew that some areas were going to be impacted. And could we have drawn, say, the eastern boundary a little bit further west and taken that residential area out? Yes, but in doing so, we would have likely had a patchwork of streets that has already been mentioned, would have been very confusing to determine where somebody might have been. So we took a very easy to understand geographical area that had as minimal an impact as possible on the residential real estate to create something that we believe as an association was kind of a win-win for everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Barton. Thank you for your work on that committee as well. We need to move along here now. Is there anything else concerning this matter? Thank you, Jeff Schmidt, for your presentation today, and good luck with the rest of it.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask one quick
yes,
question,
Mr.
Jeff?
Staggers.
It's in regard to another issue that we have been asking to get a briefing on. That's in regard to Pettigrew Heights. Do you know when we might get some more information on that?
Please, Jeff.
I can go back to the director and ask him when he'd like to schedule an informational.
Okay, that's great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again, Jeff. Moving along here, Part B is the Golf Course Management Agreement Audit Report with Rich Auxel, our lead internal auditor. Rich?
Thank you. And today we also have in the audience, we have Don Kearney from Park and Recreation and Tom Jansa from Dakota Golf Management. So if you have any questions after this, I'm sure one of the three of us can answer those questions. You should have a hard copy at your desk there, and you should have received an electronic copy also earlier. This is a compliance audit. What we do is we look at what the agreement says, we look at the major provisions, and then we go out and see if the management company is doing what's required in the agreement. And on that first page, you see the objectives. There are 6 of those. I'll read those briefly and then give you the short answer to those, and then we'll talk just a few minutes about some of the recommendations. The objective of this audit were to determine if management is using best efforts to operate the golf course in an efficient manner and maintain a first-class facility. That was part of the agreement. And the short answer is yes, they are, and I'll direct your attention to page 3. You can look at that little survey results from 2007 of the, I believe it's 8 courses in the Sioux Falls area that are open to the public, and how golfers rated those courses. And 2 of the 3 municipal courses were right at the very top there, Prairie Green and Elmwood. And Keene was rated lower, and I think the reason is probably because that's considered a beginner's course, and a lot of experienced golfers would not choose to play golf there. So I think that's probably why it didn't rate as highly. Number 2 for the objectives. The city is receiving all revenue due according to the agreements. The answer is yes, they are. They're receiving about $250,000 into the general fund each year. Number 3, capital improvements are being financed from the 10% retention described in Section 8 of the agreements. What that is 10% of the revenue is supposed to be put into the general fund. Another 10% is supposed to be set aside for capital improvements, and we found that they do have a checking account set up for improvements. And we did find that one of the capital improvements, specifically the clubhouse at Prairie Green, is being financed with the second penny, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Number 4, proper insurance coverage is maintained. We did have one audit finding on that, and management has corrected that situation. The insurance coverage was not quite in agreement with what the agreement required, and management has agreed to correct that situation. I think that's on page 6 at the bottom there. That was our second recommendation, and they have addressed that concern. Our 5th objective, required reports are being submitted by management on a timely basis. We found that they were. And number 6, the city is performing its responsibilities according to the agreements with Dakota Golf. And we found that the city is substantially performing its responsibilities. I want to direct your attention there to audit finding number 1 there on page 4. In the capital program, we have work on the Prairie Green clubhouse that's scheduled, I believe, the engineering will start in 2011, and in 2012 they'll have a new clubhouse out there, and that'll be financed with the second penny. It's kind of a philosophical discussion. There's a sufficient revenue from the golf courses to finance the capital improvements. And we just want to point out that while the general fund is receiving revenue, we were planning to pay for this clubhouse with the second penny. It's a case of management have the response there on page 6 there. You can read their response. And it's nothing that's, it's to say that it's not wrong to pay for that out of the second penny, but we felt like perhaps when we rewrite the agreement, we could have maybe less money going to the general fund, and that all the capital improvements could be financed from the golf course revenues. It's more of a philosophical issue, and you can make your own conclusion on that. But I'd like to direct your attention now to our observations that we had. That's on page 5 of the report. We noticed that this agreement was awarded in 2008. It was a 4-year agreement. It was sort of an extension of what from the original agreement from 1998. At that time, there was no RFP done to determine if there was another management company interested. Talking to Dakota Golf and to Park and Recreation, it was thought that there probably isn't a company out there that was seriously interested in managing the golf courses. However, if we don't do an RFP, we're never quite sure about that, so we pointed that out. We want also just to make it clear that Dakota Golf is doing a very good job of managing the courses well. Park and Recreation has a good working relationship with Dakota Golf. And it was also thought that maybe if you had an outside company come in from out of state, that they might not be as responsive as Dakota Golf is as a local management company. And also another observation was that there's a lot of different ways to do golf courses, municipal golf courses. Back in the 80s, a lot of cities, including Sioux Falls, operated them as an enterprise fund where you had city employees that would manage the golf course and do the maintenance. And then there was a trend toward privatization maybe 20 years ago, and the city at that point kind of went that route where we still own the golf courses and the buildings, but we thought it best if we hired a management company to do that responsibility for us. We thought the expertise that they could bring would better suit the citizens and the golfers. And so that's the way it's been for a while now. And there are several ways of doing golf courses. Baltimore took a unique approach of forming a nonprofit corporation, and they had, I believe, 7 courses in their city. And the mayor of Baltimore decided that he would turn that over to a nonprofit corporation to manage those golf courses. So we thought that it was just sort of a general recommendation that perhaps when it's time to renew the contract, that we do an RFP, and also perhaps at that time it would be good to sit down maybe with people from the Golf Advisory Board, from the Park Department, maybe from City Council, to decide if that current model of doing golf courses still makes sense for the city, or if there's a better model out there. It was just sort of a general recommendation out there. So we just want you to be aware of that. Now, I think if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those, and if I can't answer, I'll defer to our members, to our guests in the audience today.
Councilman Staggers.
Yes. Rich, how much does Dakota Golf get for managing this?
Well, they get to keep the revenue. They have to pay us 10%, which is about $250,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how much do they get, like this last year?
Tom, do you want to? As far as the gross revenue is what you're interested in?
Yes, well, yeah, how much
Well,
did?
10%, I think on page
Okay.
page 4 there at the top there, we get 10%. In 2007, we received $261,000, and that represents about 10% of the gross revenue.
So that'd be about $2 million?
Yeah, but as far as making a profit, I believe when we were looking at the audited financial statements, there were a couple of years where they were actually did not make a profit.
Sure.
They were not, once they paid their employees and they paid the expenses and they paid various salaries, they, some years they showed a profit, some years they do not show a profit.
So even though years when they don't show a profit, they still pay us 10%, is that
Yes,
true?
that's the agreement. They have to pay us that 10%, yes. And a lot of cities, I might add that some cities, this is a very common thing to have a municipal golf course and have a management company. Some cities just get a percentage revenue, and some cities just want a flat fee. There's different ways to do that.
Councilor Costello.
Rich, just for point of clarification, so the golf course, they provide all the labor to staff the
Yes.
clubhouses.
There's
to
no city
maintain-
employees, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
there's no city, there's no general fund dollars going into the golf course. We're basically just getting money out of the golf course.
Yes, yes. We get 10% of that is going into the general fund.
And they have audited financial statements every year?
Yes, they have audited financial statements, and we review those audit reports and the financials, yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
Rich, there's two things here, and you might not be the person to answer this here, but I see here part of the funding in the Prairie Gain CIP project is for work on the storm drainage ponds. Obviously, this is tied into our retention detention system and waterway out on that end of town. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Is when the golf course originally was designed, it was designed to accommodate not only golf course features on the course as far as water features, but also the storm drainage that goes through there. One of the challenges we have with those ponds out there, they're very shallow. Odor can be a problem. Obviously, algae bloom can also be a problem because of that. And so this would, the project we have in the CIP is actually do some dredging to create, because they silt in over time as well. And so it's more of a maintenance project.
That's great. That's a great use of land here, combined one here and done. The other question I had was out on Elmwood. It says it's a 27-hole course. Obviously, we have an 18 and then the East 9. Do you know any figures for the usage of the East 9 golf course?
I bet you Tom could tell you.
Very good.
Tom Jansen, Dakota Golf. We do about 23,000 rounds on the East 9 every year. And that compares about roughly to the use at Keene Park is about 25,000 rounds. The rounds totals at the 18-hole courses are higher than that.
Very good. And then did I see a driving range on that piece of property as well?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Tom, just out of curiosity, the rounds on the 18 holes, what do they average?
There have been about 45,000 rounds at Elmwood over the past 4 or 5 years.
Councilor Benninga.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, thank you for your work. You could stand or leave or whatever. The golf courses are probably, I think, the only opportunity or the only investment the city has that we have no risk and we make money at.
We do.
Which is by itself is a blue ribbon kind of thing. The other thing that I guess I have a question about is when we just got done talking about the overlay of the airport, how does that affect any growth expansions or whatever could happen with the East 9? Is that an issue?
Don Kearney with Parks and Rec. At least from what I heard on the presentation today, I doubt very much that we'll have any residential structures, and so from that aspect of it, we should be in good shape. But I will tell you that we do have avigation easements. We have to keep trees trimmed and things like that because of the runways that the taking off and landing at the golf courses, and so Tom and I have met with Mike on several occasions over the last few years because things come up from time to time, and they'll go out and measure our trees, and we'll go out and trim trees, and so there are some operational considerations with regard to the airport being a neighbor, but so far, we've been able to manage. So I don't think anything with this report, but probably a good idea for me to check with Jeff to see if there's anything that might be impacted.
Councilor Anderson.
I want to say it was 98. 95, excuse me. Yes,
So it's about 13 years old right now.
that's correct.
Okay. And we're going to move that to Keene, is that?
Yeah, that's the plan. The current clubhouse at Keene Park is not accessible, and it's pretty small. And it's part of our ADA transition plan to remedy that building, so it is compliant with the ADA. And one of the suggestions is, and recommendations is, to relocate that smaller clubhouse that we have at Prairie Green, which would be suitably sized for Keene, and move that in there, and then build a new one at Prairie Green.
Okay, so the issue at Prairie Green is mainly space.
Yeah, it's primarily, there's space for about 12 people to sit down at a 18-hole golf course. It's pretty small compared to even some of the other outlying smaller communities like Brandon and some of the other communities in the area.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Councilor Knudsen.
Not a question, but just a comment. I still have some interest in seeing continued discussion or some discussion with the city, with the CJ Callaway's people, just to see if there's any kind of a partnership we could work out with them for a clubhouse, because they have such a nice restaurant and bar area, and they're right beside the golf club and golf course, and I'd just like to continue to see a little. I just want us to think about that more.
I think it's been thought about many, many times. There's a lot more to that story than just that chapter.
Anything else of Rich? Councilor Jameson.
Rich, I just wanted to comment on your tie.
Oh, I thought somebody would.
I think that's very, very good tie.
It's a Victory Monday tie. Yeah.
I like it.
Just want to thank Tom Jansen and Don Kearney for their cooperation during this audit also.
Very good. Thank you, Rich.
Great, thank you.
Next item is I would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session.
Chairman, right before that, would it be possible, as late as it's getting, for us to just postpone our Public Services Committee meeting? I see our chair is here now until January. I mean, the issues are important, but they're not like, I don't think the world would end if we continued our committee meeting in January on these issues.
Councilor Anderson.
Vernon? Kermit?
Sure.
No, I have no problem with postponing.
Deborah, do you have any deadlines you're trying to meet with this?
No, just whatever you guys would want to do is, we'll proceed with your schedule, your agenda.
I would suggest we just see how long executive session goes, with the thought that we probably aren't going to make that meeting tonight.
Yeah, I agree.
Very good. Okay, now, can I go to my motion here?
I will make a motion to go into executive session. Is that what you're asking for?
I need a motion to adjourn into executive session.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to adjourn our informational meeting and go into executive session. Knudsen.
I'm looking for a second.
Second, Anderson.
Anderson, second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The ayes have it. We stand adjourned into executive session. All those who are not intimately involved